My name is Alex Mola. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, practicing law under the firm of Mola Kimos of Advocates. And today, the explainer, I'll be touching on the controversial statement of the president permitting the police or directing the police to shoot people in the leg. Of course, there is a context to that. But the first thing that has to be understood is that the word of the president is, as Hamino has at some point said, sometimes taken as law, especially by the people who have not studied law. And so, to understand the gravity of that statement, it is good that we look a little bit of the history of what it means. Because this statement in itself is to say that we go outside the law and adopt another model of dealing with people. In 2010, we passed our constitution, the new constitution. This constitution, under Article 49, provided that if anyone is suspected of making or committing any crime, that person is supposed to be arrested, and at the time of being arrested has to be informed of why they're being arrested. They have other rights, including the right to remain silent, the right to an advocate, and the right to be presented before a court of law within 24 hours. Now, once the person is presented before the court, they have to be processed through the due process. What the Constitution was doing is basically to introduce that in dealing with any person or in the activities of the government, then the governing principle should be the rule of law. And perhaps it's important that we look a little bit of the history of the rule of law as has developed over time. During the olden times, as far as the 1700 before Christ, the Moharrabi law did provide that everyone was subject to law. Though at that particular point, there were classes, and so different laws applied to different classes. Aristotle did indicate, the great ancient philosopher did indicate, that it's better to be governed by the law than any one citizen. And this moved on to medieval times, when people like Augustine and Aquinas did indicate that every single person is supposed to be governed by what they consider to be the natural law, the law of God. And during the same period, King John of England was forced to sign the Magna Carta, which did provide that every person, including kings, and in this context, presidents, are subject to the law. That in their activities and conduct, they must be governed by the law. This moved on to the modern times, philosophers like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, in the affirmation of the social contract, providing that the law should be the governing principle of everyone and not an arbitrary rule. Of course, later on, Ivy Dicey, in his work, Introduction to the Constitution, did give what he considered the three basic principles. One, that the law is supreme, that all of us, what that means is that all of us are subject to the law, that no one can do something outside the law. And secondly, that all of us are equal before the law. And thirdly, Dicey considered that in protection of liberties of men, rights and liberties of men, the courts were better placed to protect these rights. Now, I gave that history to show how far we have come and how the issues of the rights of people have to be viewed. Now, the president is not an ordinary person. He heads the government and he controls the instruments of power, including the police. However, in so doing, the president is subject to the law. In his words and actions, he should be governed by the law, and he knows it. So by saying that the police should shoot the protesters in the leg, the president was actually acting arbitrarily and outside the law. He knows what the Constitution says. He swore to protect the Constitution. And so any person who is suspected to commit any crime, including the protesters he was talking about, or people who are suspected to be vandalizing or destroying people's properties, that person is supposed to be apprehended, arrested, and presented to court. The person should not be shot and taken to hospital and then taken to court. That is outside the law. And I believe it has been decided by the courts that the president, in exceptional circumstances, the president by himself can be taken to task to prevent or to protect the Constitution, especially if the president's conduct might lead to serious violation of the Constitution. I'm not saying that the president should be sued, but I'm saying that the president should be put to task, because in his capacity as the head of state, he cannot, whether publicly or privately, instruct the police to shoot private citizens. And it's even an established principle that the police, in using force, they are supposed to use a force proportionate to the threat. Now, the president's statement was blanket. It was a blanket statement. It does not say that the police shoot at the people who are shooting them. No. It says the people who are seen, perhaps destroying properties or threatening peace. This is introducing the rule of the jungle. And this country, through the Constitution of Kenya, is a country that can only be governed by the rule of law. That is the explainer.